Terrible things happening in the Italian economy. What you need to know. Italy is one of the most attractive economies in the world. This is because it faces most, if not all, of the major economic challenges that countries around the world have to face. Italy has one of the highest levels of national debt in the world, an aging population, an exodus of the few young skilled workers, and also has to deal with regional disparities, weak growth rates, and unstable tax revenues. If you find the video you watch useful, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and support us with a donation. Your help is precious to us and will allow us to continue producing quality content for you. You can do it here below, through the appropriate buttons, subscribe, and thanks. Italy also represents an excellent case study as a country that is facing problems such as globalization, French substitution, and trade restrictions. Most of these unknown problems are ones that Italy has had to deal with for at least the last 20 years, and this is one of the reasons why the country's economy has been in decline for 15 years. It may seem like a negative thing, but strangely enough, the economy has welcomed it on one hand. On the other hand, the country has one of the highest poverty rates in the EU, often associated with relative prosperity, at least compared to most of the rest of the world. Although the parallels are not perfect, economists can learn a lot from these challenges. Italy not only offers great clues as to what the future holds for its economy, but also presents some truly fascinating economic features. Together with Germany and France, Italy represents more than half of the European Union's gross domestic product, and together they make up the second largest economy in the world. Together with Germany and France, Italy represents more than half of the European Union's gross domestic product. Why did the Italian economy, one of the world's fastest growing developed economies, stop growing almost immediately? Not once, not twice, but 3 times. What went well and what went wrong in addressing the country's long list of challenges? Who is the real culprit behind the country's economic stagnation? How has Italy been affected by devastating inequalities? And finally, is the country's economic model out of tune with the new global context? In recent years, Italy has been shaken by a series of economic scandals. The Italian economy reached its peak in 2008. Since then, the Italian economy has been largely stagnant and has experienced a slow overall decline, losing about 20% of its nominal economic output in the last decade. But history shows that this is not new for Italy, and that the current Italian economy is an extension of a trend that has repeated itself in Italy since the end of World War II. Decades of rapid growth followed by near total stagnation, often from negative growth, and then back to rapid growth. Economic production is only one measure of economic health, but even such a simple chart tells a truly interesting story of how Italy got to where it is today. Italy has historically been the strongest industrial economy in all of Europe until it was overtaken by the Dutch and the English, who became global colonial powers. Subsequently, despite a slower pace of industrialization than other European powers such as France and Germany, Italy remained in many respects among the top 5 economies in Europe for almost 1,000 years. Its topography, protected by mountains to the north but with easy access to the Mediterranean for fishing and trade, made it the perfect place for the flourishing of civilization. And this holds true for the economy today as it did in 500 BC. The current Italian economy was born after World War II. The war industry was transformed into national industry under the support and supervision of the United States, and in many cases the country was literally rebuilt from the rubble. The United States invested billions of dollars in the reconstruction of Western Europe through the Marshall Plan. This spending was partly motivated by the need to create a new customer base from which the American industrial sector could buy all the goods it was able to produce, but it was also largely aimed at retraining dependent allies to stop the spread of communism from the Soviet Union. The United States also undertook similar reconstruction efforts in Korea and Japan to prevent the spread of communist influence from the People's Republic of China. Although they did not begin in a favorable context, these reconstruction efforts led to a long period of sustained growth. However, political tensions continued behind the scenes and caused serious internal problems, such as the Bologna Station bombings in 1980. In many ways, these political tensions were also the cause and accelerator of other economic problems in the country. Italy seemed to be doing very well only in terms of economic production, but it is relatively easy to grow an economy by borrowing large amounts of money to finance large development projects. The challenge is to ensure that development creates sustainable value for the local economy and for export markets. The Italian economy entered the first decade of modern recession when construction and reconstruction work stopped or it was no longer possible to obtain further financing. During this period, the Italian government also had to face external challenges such as mass unemployment, high debt burden, high inflation, and rising energy costs of fossil fuels, on which the young industry had become heavily dependent. An economic recession represents a good opportunity for a country to change its policies and cut sectors that are causing problems. This is exactly what happened during this first recession. The country moved away from simply building infrastructure and focused its attention on using such infrastructure to create something that could be sold around the world. It also implemented reforms such as granting greater independence to the central bank and the ability to raise interest rates to contain inflation. At the same time, the law on wage reductions was relaxed. Today, wage cuts are less common due to the problems they cause in the market, but the rule is that wages keep pace with inflation regardless, even if it was not agreed in the employment contract. At first glance, this may seem fair. It may seem strange that workers' wages are reduced simply because they accept a wage, when they could buy more with the same amount of money if inflation were higher. But the problem is that automatic wage slippage accelerates one of the most dangerous processes in the economy, the wage price spiral. If inflation is high, workers will demand higher wages to keep pace with the rising cost of goods and services they need to buy. If companies agree to pay higher wages, they will have to raise prices to maintain their profitability, and the price increase will trigger inflation again. What saves many economies from this situation is the delay between inflation and citizens' demand for higher wages. If inflation is low, many people do not realize that wages are not keeping pace. If wages had automatically kept pace with inflation, as happened in Italy during this period, the process known as the wage price spiral would have been faster and more difficult to correct. The recession was undoubtedly painful for Italy, but by imposing the necessary changes, Italy became one of the fastest growing economies not only in the world, but also in history. In just 7 years, from 1985 to 1992, Italy tripled its economic output, thanks to an export-led industrial boom. In this sense, the country has an important advantage that is difficult to recognize in economic figures alone. International customers pay a premium for made-in-Italy products because Italy had and still has a reputation for high quality and craftsmanship and technology for the production of anything, from fast cars to luxury handbags and even products such as olive oil. If an exported product bears the Made in Italy logo, many consumers are willing to pay a premium, even if the price of that product is higher than that of competing products in other countries around the world. To provide the world market with the cheapest, i.e. most competitive, products, some countries are forced to take extreme measures to cut out a long series of international competitors at every opportunity. The fact that Italy can add as much or even more value by producing goods only within its own borders is an important advantage that only a few countries in the world have. Unfortunately, however, this economic boom did not last forever. When governments and citizens began to take out irresponsible loans in anticipation of greater future growth, debts began to rise again. There was also the problem of tax evasion. The small industries that made up the backbone of the Italian export miracle were very difficult to tax, and it became almost a national pastime to exploit weak government controls and poorly planned loopholes to pay little or no tax. Today, in general, increasing spending through borrowing, while at the same time reducing taxation and government regulation, is a typical expansionary economic policy, whether intentional or not. Even if the government did not intend to do so, such policies were probably necessary to get out of the situation it was in the 1980s. But to join the Eurozone and use the new currency of the EU, Italy had to get its act together. It had to do a better job of reducing debt and ensuring that citizens paid taxes. More regulation, less debt, and higher taxes sucked money out of the economy and stifled economic growth, even though it was the right thing to do. In the rest of the 1990s, the Italian economy entered another period of stagnation that lasted almost a decade. Fortunately, the introduction of the euro in 1999 gave Italy the perfect opportunity to start growing again. After a temporary recession, Italy doubled its economic output in less than a decade, returning to being one of the fastest growing industrialized countries in the world. Membership in the Eurozone made it easier to attract foreign investment, foreign workers, and buyers of goods from abroad. Trading partners no longer had to worry about exchange rate risks in a notoriously unstable era. The benefits of the euro area also coincided with the further development of the Italian manufacturing sector and the growth of sectors such as tourism. Italy was then hit by the GFC and the Eurozone crisis and has since entered a new period of recession. The reason why we have spent so much time analyzing the details of Italy's unique economic history of booms and plateaus is that one wonders whether Italy can have a new boom. Obviously, no one, not even economists, can predict the future, but if history repeats itself, it seems that it is time for Italy to climb another step of this strange ladder of economic production. Unfortunately, the situation is not that simple, and a series of new challenges combined with some old historical challenges make Italy's comeback impossible. The first of these is simply the aging of the population. Italy is one of the oldest countries in the world and much of the working population is approaching retirement age. This in itself would not be a problem, if it were not for the fact that the birth rate is low. Therefore, young people will not be added to the workforce to compensate for those who leave it, resulting in a depletion of resources, which is unfortunate, but forgive me for putting it that way. This problem is exacerbated by the fact that Italy is one of the countries with one of the highest rates of emigration of young graduates to other countries where they can earn an income commensurate with their skills. Earlier this year, we had the opportunity to speak with Professor Borelli of Bocconi University in Italy, a highly respected economist who has mentored some of Italy's brightest students, and he provided us with an excellent insight into this problem. In fact, Italy is a net sender of graduates, not a net receiver. We therefore want to attract more graduates rather than send them to other countries. So, from a national perspective, I believe this is a problem especially for the countries of origin. But let me say two things about this. 1. At the individual level, greater freedom of movement is the right incentive for individuals. The second perspective is that countries that are losing these talents, perhaps because they are overeducated relative to their economic level in terms of competition for talent, should realize that they need to seriously think about the opportunities available for these talents in their countries or in their regions. Italian students who want to work in Germany, France, the Netherlands, or Luxembourg, for example, do not even need to apply for a visa, thanks to a policy that allows them to work anywhere in the EU member states. Higher wages could help stem the exodus of talented young Italians, but the Italian industry is so inefficient that it cannot afford to compete with its major European rivals. The average size of an Italian company is much smaller than that of a company in other developed European countries. The average number of employees per company in Italy is 3.5 units. In Italy there are 3.6 employees per company, compared to an average of 15 in Western Europe. Company size is important in an industrialized economy. The larger the company, the more it is able to produce specialized and value-added goods. In most advanced industries, the marginal benefit of adding one more worker is positive. The automobile is a good example, as it is one of Italy's major industries and probably the first thing that comes to mind for everyone when thinking about Italian production. A company with 10 employees, each producing a car from scratch, will produce fewer cars in a year than a company with 10 employees who focus on one part of car assembly. If a worker produces only engines, he can be skilled. A company with 10 workers can use for these workers a number of tools 10 times greater. A worker who produces only engines can be given tools made only for engines. On the other hand, a worker who has to make an entire car must allocate his tool budget to everything needed for the car, which makes him less specialized and therefore less efficient. In addition to the means of production of cars, what Italian companies have really neglected to invest in is technology. Computers and related technologies have significantly increased the economic value that a single worker can produce in a day. A classic example is that an accountant using a simple program like Excel can produce the same amount of financial reports as 10 accountants using an abacus. If small Italian businesses are lagging behind other European countries in adopting technology, the same Western Europe is lagging behind many American and Asian economies. In addition to making industrial investments more efficient, technology has become a big industry in its own right. Many of the world's largest companies are high-tech companies. Naturally, Italy has also benefited in some respects from these small industries. With regard to the production of luxury goods, companies help the country maintain its reputation as a country where quality is more important than quantity. But countries like Britain, France, and Germany have achieved the same result without sacrificing size. A German Mercedes employs more or less the same number of workers as an Italian Fiat, but the Mercedes is much higher end compared to a cheap car and generates a much higher export profit margin. A large number of small businesses is also more difficult to tax than a small number of large companies, which highlights another problem of the Italian economy. The Italian black market is extremely large for a developed country and, despite its reputation, much of it is not driven by the mafia, but by informal businesses operating in the gray market to evade regulation and avoid taxes. In the past, the underground economy accounted for 25% of the national economy. Today it is around 12%, an improvement, but still very low. One of the reasons why the informal economy is so extensive is that people do not have many other options. Italy is a developed economy, but it has the highest poverty rate in all of Europe, especially in the south, which is much poorer than the north. Unfortunately, today Italy finds itself in a situation of high unemployment, stagnant economic production, aging population, uncompetitive industry, low tax revenue, high debt, and growing interest payments on that debt. Raising taxes or cutting spending to reduce the debt burden would paralyze already struggling local industries. If the country takes out more loans, it risks financial collapse. If nothing is done, the situation risks getting worse. In economics and in most sciences, it is assumed that we are moving toward an idealized future. Today the world is thousands of times richer than it was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but this is the exception rather than the rule. Italy is just one of a long list of developed countries that are finding it increasingly difficult to compete in an increasingly competitive global economy. What was your experience with the topic covered in this video? Tell us about it in the comments, we are curious to know. And if you have any doubts or questions, don't hold back. Leave a comment, even just a simple like would be perfect, but most importantly, subscribe to the channel to stay informed about upcoming releases.